All right, we're going back into the story of Joseph. To do that, I'll let comedian Louis C.K. introduce it, and if you like him, you don't have to say that you do, but some of you probably do. Louis C.K. is not a believer, but he did share his thoughts on the silliness of atheism one time. He said, "Look, I'm not religious. I don't know if there is a God. That's all I can say honestly. I don't know. Some people can say that they know there isn't a God. That's a weird thing to say. There's no God. Are you sure? Yeah, there's no God. Well, how do you know? Because I haven't seen him. But how do you know?" Louis C.K. asks. "There's a vast universe you can see for about 100 yards if a building is not in the way. How can you possibly know? Did you look everywhere? Did you look in the downstairs bathroom?" "No, I haven't. I haven't seen him yet." And then Louis C.K. says, "Well, I haven't seen the film 12 Years a Slave yet. Does that mean the film doesn't exist?" Well, there are those who don't see God. They don't see God. They can look at the same sunrise that you look at and say, "I don't see any evidence for God." They can look into the night sky and see the thousands of stars. "I don't see any evidence for God." They can look in the face of their newborn infant daughter and say, "I don't see God." They can listen to the roar of ocean waves and say, "I don't see God in that." And then there are other folks on the other, let's say, other extreme that see God everywhere. There was a story a couple years ago about this lady in Missouri that opened her pack of Cheetos, and she saw this Cheeto shaped like a cross, and she said, "That's Jesus. That's the image of Jesus." In fact, she called it Jesus, all right? So some people, in the foam on the top of their latte or in their Cheeto bag or on a soup stain on their table, they see God everywhere. Well, over the past few weeks, we've been following this remarkable individual named Joseph in the Old Testament, and he saw God at work in his life, not in a trivial sense, not in a stain or a Cheeto, but he saw God at work in his story constantly in all sorts of places. Genesis chapter 39, verse 21 says, "The Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love." That word "showed," okay? God revealed himself. God pulled the curtain back. And if Joseph was paying attention, and he was able to see God. And my prayer for you is that with the eyes of faith, when God occasionally in those special moments pulls the curtain back, that you'll say, "I see God. I see God at work in my life." So he's here a long way away from home, a long way away from the friends that he grew up with. He is in a foreign land, trapped in Pharaoh's dungeon in Egypt. And the text says that not only was God with him, but God showed him his faithful love, his chesed. So even in his darkest hour, he's able to see. He's able to see the Lord who loves him, the Lord who's been with him all the way. And that's not foolishness, that's faith. Okay? Where others would have locked in a dungeon with no hope of escape, others might have gone insane, or others might have grown so incredibly broken and bitter they wouldn't have perceived God and might have lost their faith. Joseph continued to believe. Joseph continued to hope, and Joseph continued in his situation to offer his very best in that situation. And so he walked by faith and not by sight. Now, over the past few weeks, we've been working through the life of Joseph. We've seen this over and over again. Spoiler alert this morning, everything turns out really great for Joseph, okay? The end of the movie is this. He's released from prison. He becomes basically the guy that runs Egypt, okay? Pharaoh's right-hand man. He's prosperous. He has a wife. He has children. It's all great in the end. Joseph didn't know that, though. Okay, we know how the film ends. Joseph is in the middle of his story as you're in the middle of your story, and we don't get that. We don't get to know exactly how the last chapter wraps up, do we? But we're faithful, we're hopeful, we work hard because we know that God is at work in our lives, and the world is watching. The world is paying attention to how God's people live. Pharaoh was watching. We find out in chapter 41, verse 38, that Pharaoh noticed something. He said, "Can we find a better man than Joseph for this job?" Basically, running the country. God's Spirit is truly in him. This is a pagan king speaking about seeing God in this person. And so there may be a lot of folks out in the world, I haven't seen God. There's no evidence for God. You may be the evidence of God. You may be the reality of Christ that their soul has been longing to see. The world is watching people of faith to see how they respond to different situations that are thrown at them. Now let's get back to that dungeon in Egypt. We have the benefit of knowing how the story turns out. Joseph didn't know that. When we find Joseph in the story this morning, he is basically stuck, right? He's basically stuck in this situation in the dungeon. He will spend years there, and he did not know exactly how it was all going to work out. Okay, so moving on. Have you ever felt that way before? You ever felt stuck like that? We use different expressions. We word it different ways. I'm in a dead-end job, or you may feel that you are stuck in a dead-end relationship, have no idea how to get out of this. You may feel like you are stuck with a diagnosis, an illness. You may feel like you are imprisoned. You're stuck in these emotions of bitterness and resentment, and things have been done to you. Things have happened to you that were not fair, and you're just stuck in these emotions, this vicious cycle of resentment. You may feel like you are stuck in a place of despair, like Houston or somewhere like that. That was for you, Bordeaux. Maybe Newark or Wichita would have been better. I don't know. Anyway, here's the thing. No matter where you find yourself, one of those situations describes you. No matter where you find yourself, if you can see God in your situation, you won't lose hope, right? I mean, you'll be able to hang on. You'll even be able to work in that situation to bring out the good in that situation. There's Joseph. He's locked up. We've already seen in his story already, this guy's a gifted administrator. He's a gifted leader, a strategist. He showed that at Potiphar's house. Now he shows that in the prison, where very quickly he pours himself into life in prison, and he becomes the warden's right-hand man. So we pick it up in 39 verses 21 to 23. The Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. And while most of the prisoners there were doing time, that text tells us Joseph was doing overtime. He was working hard to improve the conditions within that dungeon. He believed in blooming where you're planted. He didn't choose to be stuck in prison, but he did choose to make a difference in that place. As you might imagine, he became popular not only with the prison warden, he became very popular with the other prisoners because he was making life better. He was making things better in that dungeon. The fellow inmates, some of them at least, were former employees of Pharaoh. There is a butler or a cupbearer, and there is a baker as well. And we learn a little bit about them in the text as well. We don't know what their crimes were. Many speculate that perhaps they had been involved in a coup attempt or a plot to kill Pharaoh. We don't know for sure, but we just know that they're there. They had fallen out of favor, all right? And they're there in the dungeon. Been in there for a long time. And on one particular night, they had each, during that exact sleep cycle, they had dreams, distinct dreams, particular to their own lives and to their own futures. And these dreams were disturbing to them, okay? Not disturbing necessarily because of the content of the dreams, but disturbing because they felt like, this dream is supposed to tell me something. I just know it. This dream is important, but they didn't know what the message was. And so they woke up, they were stressed out, they were frustrated by not knowing, confused by their dreams, and Joseph cared, right? He saw them and he noticed and he said, guys, what's up? You don't look good. And so they began to share their dreams because Joseph told them God can reveal truth through dreams. So they began to share their dreams with him. The butler had this dream about a grapevine. A grapevine that sprouts up, has 3 branches. It is so fertile, it is bursting with blooms and buds, and then suddenly all of this fruit begins to grow. These luscious grapes appear, and in the butler's dream, he takes this big bunch of grapes and he just squeezes them over Pharaoh's royal goblet, over his royal cup, and that juice pours in there, and then he hands it to Pharaoh. He doesn't know what it means, though. Joseph says, I know exactly what that means. What that means is in 3 days. Think about the specificity. I mean, he has pinned himself down to this interpretation. Nothing vague about this. In 3 days, Pharaoh is going to release you from prison and is going to give you your old job back. And imagine how the butler felt, how much hope and excitement. 3 more days and I'm out of here and I'm back in the palace. Great news, great news. Well, the baker is watching all this. Obviously, he gets a little excited about, well, what does my dream mean? So he says, I kind of can't wait to hear the interpretation. So he explains his dream. He says, there were these baskets of bread, 3 baskets of bread on top of my head. And this is Pharaoh's bread. This is headed for Pharaoh's dinner table. But these birds came, and these birds began to eat the bread out of the top basket. I have no idea what this means. Can you help me figure out what this means? And Joseph said, yeah. Here's what it means. You're going to be called out of the dungeon by Pharaoh, and he's going to lift you up and execute you. And then the birds are going to come and they're going to eat the flesh off your bones. I got to tell you, I read that and I'm like, man, I don't know if I could have shared that one. You know, the first one is so great to give the good news, right? I mean, it's so great to tell people, hey, this is gonna be great. You're gonna love this. You guys are going there on your vacation. Oh, it's great. You got to try this place. But when you know something bad is going to happen, that's a different deal. I mean, right? I mean, I think if I had been Joseph, what a temptation it would have been to say, you get to the baker's dream and you're like, boy, yours is just cloudy. I can't figure that one out at all. Or just kind of maybe tell half the dream, like, yes, in 3 days, Pharaoh is gonna release you from the dungeon, and after that, it doesn't make any. Why does Joseph tell him the dream? I mean, I think there's something here for me. I think there's something here for us. Part of being faithful to God, I'll just speak as a minister of the Word, as a preacher this morning. Part of being faithful to God is not only sharing the encouraging, the uplifting, the comforting message that's in the Scripture, the hopeful message, but it is also sharing the hard stuff, the difficult stuff, the uncomfortable stuff, sharing the whole counsel of God. That's what I think we're called to do when it comes to the Word of God. So after interpreting the two dreams and even telling them the exact day it would happen, like imagine it was Sunday, well, on Wednesday this is going to happen, all right? It happens. Pharaoh calls them out. Pharaoh gives the cupbearer, the butler, his old job back. Pharaoh puts the baker to death. But there is one thing that Joseph asked that butler. He said, look, you're going to get out of here. When you do, don't forget about me. When you do, put in a good word for me with Pharaoh. Maybe he'll release me as well. But chapter 40, verse 23 says that the butler forgot all about Joseph. Forgotten. God doesn't forget about Joseph, and God doesn't forget about you. 2 years after the butler got his old job back, something similar happened as far as the dreams go. This time it was Pharaoh. Pharaoh had these dreams. And Pharaoh felt like these aren't just like random dreams. There is divine inspiration in these dreams. Can my counselors, can my advisors, can someone please explain what I'm supposed to do with these dreams? No one could. And then, aha, the butler's like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. Name is Joseph. He's locked up down in your dungeon. I had a dream. He explained my dream. It happened just like he said it was going to happen. So Pharaoh said, why don't you go call Joseph? Now, we have a little reminder in the text that dungeon life wasn't easy, okay? Because when they call Joseph, he doesn't just like walk right up there. They have to clean him up, right? I mean, he gets a bath, he gets shaved, he gets some clean clothes put on, and there he is in the presence of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh begins to talk about the dreams that he has received. Let's pick it up in chapter 41, verses 25 to 32. Here we go. Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. Now, here were the dreams. Real quick, just a little break here. Here were the dreams. So, first dream, Pharaoh sees these nice, healthy, like Angus cows. I mean, big, healthy cows grazing by the rich Nile River. And then these little skinny, scrawny cows, 7 of them come up behind those 7 healthy cows and eat them. And all you're left with are 7 scrawny cows. They didn't gain a pound, okay? And then he sees these 2 stalks of wheat. And one of the stalks has got these big heads of grain on it. It looks very, very healthy. The other one has these 7 withered, shriveled heads of grain. And this is kind of strange, okay? But the withered, shriveled stalk, it consumes the big one. So all you're left with are these really pathetic-looking heads of grain. So we pick it up again. He says, God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he's about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. That's good news. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the 7 thin heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine. Not so good. This will happen just as I have described it, for God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt, but afterward there will be 7 years of famine so great that all of the prosperity in Egypt will be forgotten. Famine will destroy the land. The famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen. Pharaoh heard this, and it made sense. It made sense out of those weird images that he had been given in his dream. They had the ring of truth to them. And so Pharaoh basically is, well, what am I supposed to do? Anyway, this is the exact moment in Joseph's story where he gets unstuck. Okay, he's been in jail for years now. He gets unstuck right here. All sorts of great things are going to happen right here. He gets released from prison. He's given this amazing job as basically the vice president of Egypt, where he gets to, a little more powerful than Joe Biden perhaps. I mean, he actually gets to do real stuff, real planning and strategic stuff. Pharaoh gives him this beautiful wife, gives him a weird new Egyptian name, but that's okay. He's granted these 2 sons that are born to he and his wife. Everything is great after this moment takes place. And he does great things, by the way, for Egypt, right? He does great things for Egypt. In the 7 years of plenty, of prosperity, they are constantly funneling a little of that excess grain into these giant depositories where they're going to save and store these big storehouses, warehouses of grain. And so every one of those 7 years, they're stuffing it away. They're packing it away. They're saving. The 7 years of famine hit. And guess what? Egypt has plenty. Not only do they have plenty, not only do they survive the years of famine, but they have leverage in the international community because no one else has anything. So everybody is coming down, begging Egypt, can you help us out? Can you sell us some grain? And so the years of famine, actually, because of the strategic foresight and the administrative skill of Joseph, the years of famine in Egypt actually become something of a boom for Egypt in the international community. So he has these 2 sons now with his wife. One of them is named Manasseh. Manasseh means God has made me forget all my troubles. He arrives at this moment. He looks back on his life and he says, I look into your little face, my son. I don't remember any of that bad stuff. He has a son named Ephraim, which means God has made me fruitful in this land of grief. He's unstuck. Now remember how Joseph gets his happy ending, okay? Joseph was faithful. Joseph didn't quit on God. He was stuck, but he trusted God. He had hope. He did his best. He poured himself into the situation in which he found himself in order to make that situation better. And that's what you do when you get stuck. That is the God-ordained plan, not just for Joseph, but for all of his people when they're stuck, when they're in a holding pattern, when there is no forward progress. That is what they do. At one point, the nation of Israel was conquered by the Babylonians. Okay, so the Babylonians come in. They are the world superpower at that time. Bear with me on this. It'll make sense in a minute. So Babylon comes in. They devastate Israel, and they haul the Israelites up to Babylon. Okay. Now the Israelites are up there thinking, Lord, get us out of here. This isn't home. Jerusalem is home. How do we get out of here as quickly as possible? Well, God has something very different to tell them. Not exactly what they wanted to hear, but exactly what they needed to hear. Jeremiah 29, 4-7, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. To all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, he says, build houses, settle down, plant gardens, eat what they produce, marry, have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons, give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you will prosper too. So the people of God are there in Babylon. They're not home, and they feel trapped, and they feel stuck and they have no idea how to get out of this place. And God tells them, make yourselves comfortable. You're going to be here a while. Draw up the plans for your dream home and build it. Get out in the backyard, plant your garden. You're going to be here a while. Start looking for a wife. If you have one, start looking for a husband or wife for your kids. Think about grandkids. And Babylon, that enemy, that hated rival, pray for Babylon. Work for the good of Babylon. Be about peace and prosperity in Babylon. I think they were a little shocked by that message. But when you're stuck, God says, make the best out of that situation. Be a blessing in that situation. So many people look either A, check out. I'm just going to check out emotionally. I'm going to check out psychologically. I'm just going to mark time. How long is this going to take? Let's get it over with. Other people, instead of checking out, they start complaining. You know, they fill their time with complaining. I can't believe this is happening. Why is this happening to me? Neither one of those is God's strategy for people who feel stuck, is it? And Joseph, in all the situations in which he found himself stuck, situations that he had not chosen for himself, he chose to believe that God was with him, that God had a purpose for him. He could see God in that situation. So let's talk about making the most of the moment, or let's talk about what do you do when you're stuck? 3 things this morning that we're going to talk about that we see from the life of Joseph. Number 1, on your outline, draw inspiration from the past. Draw inspiration from the past. I'm more hopeful when I remember how God has already proven himself to be faithful. And so this is the principle of perspective. Okay? Joseph asked the men to share their dreams. Why did Joseph believe that God could speak through dreams? Because he remembered. God spoke to me through dreams. And I've actually seen God at work in these dreams being fulfilled. I've seen it at Potiphar's house. I've seen it in prison. And I believe God is going to continue to work these dreams out. He remembered how God had worked through his life. He remembered how he had been sold as a slave into this foreign land. But even then, he had been an eyewitness to God's work, even in his desperate situation. He remembered how he had been stuck in prison. But even there, God was at work in his situation, prospering him, giving him success in all that he did. 166 times in the Bible, God commands us to remember. To remember. And 52 times a year, we gather around the table on Sunday morning and we break bread and drink from the fruit of the vine together. To do this, as Jesus said, in remembrance of me. Because when we show up here on Sunday morning, and sometimes it's been tough. A tough week, a tough month, a tough year. Sometimes we get here and we feel so stuck in our situation. And Jesus says, just remember. Remember that I went to the cross for you. Remember that because of me, I have conquered your greatest enemies. Death conquered. Sin conquered. Satan conquered. Trust in me. Remember me when things get tough, because it is so easy to what? To lose perspective. When you're stuck, to lose perspective. And one way to get perspective is to think about in your life, how has God operated up to this point? Where has God moved? What opportunities has He given? You're stuck now, but where can you look back and see that He's been at work in your life? You think you've been stuck for a long time? Try Moses, okay? Leaves Egypt, wanders around in the desert for 40 years before God begins to execute that purpose in his life of being the liberator of Israel. Joseph, years in prison. Hannah, she's on her knees begging God, I want to conceive. I want to have a child. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Silence, silence, silence. And then, finally, the answer. Remember the faithfulness of God. Second thing is to dwell in the present. To dwell in the present. I'm more alive when I'm helping others. Okay? This is the principle of presence. If anyone had a right to be bitter, to be upset, to be full of resentment, it was Joseph. If anyone had a right to feel abandoned, if anyone had a right to feel like they had been treated unfairly, unjustly, Joseph, locked up for a crime he did not commit. There he is in Pharaoh's dungeon, but instead of throwing the pity party, he chose to work to make his present situation better, to bless the warden, to bless the other prisoners. It's incredible how he cared for his other inmates, his brothers there in prison. So basically, he made the choice not to emotionally and psychologically check out on life. Would have been an easy thing to do. But instead, he chose to be, I think the phrase these days is, he chose to be fully present. Fully present. He chose to live. He chose to leverage his talents and his opportunities, even in that place where he was stuck. He chose to live. So yeah, you can check out, you can start complaining, you can do any of that stuff. And let me just put a little asterisk here this morning. I'll pick on Facebook for a moment. I mean, Facebook, a lot that's good about it. But it is a place where people billboard like their highlight reels, you know. And so you can get on Facebook and you're going to see someone else's promotion at work. You're going to see how little Johnny is on the honor roll once again at school. You're going to see how their husband remembered their anniversary and took them to the most expensive place in Dallas to eat. You're going to see their vacation to Cancun, their summer home in Aspen. You're going to see all this stuff, and you're going to look at your life, and it's so easy because of Facebook or Twitter or social media. It's so easy to look out there and say, but what about me? This isn't fair. Why aren't those good things happening to me? I'm stuck. Well, like God told the Israelites in Babylon, look, start building, start planting, start praying. Yeah, even for Babylon, even for the Babylonians. Work for peace, work for prosperity. Start living in the present wherever you find yourself. It's a far healthier way to live, a far more hopeful posture is to look for doors that God opens for you to serve in the present. Whatever you are doing, put your back into it. Whatever you are doing, live for God. This is the whatever principle of Scripture, all throughout Scripture, the whatever principle. So let me share a few places where you find the whatever principle. One of them is in Proverbs 16:3, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. Commit to the Lord whatever, okay? 1 Corinthians 10:31, so whether you eat or drink, Paul is talking about the most mundane, ordinary tasks of life, eating and drinking. And he says, whether you're eating or drinking or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Colossians 3:17, and whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to Him, through Him, to God the Father. And 2 verses later, work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. By the way, those final references were written by Paul, who was stuck in prison as he wrote those verses of inspiration to us. Make the most of the present. God is, I love that. Even if no one else is paying attention, even if no one else notices what you're doing, Paul says, God's paying attention. The most important audience, the audience of one, is paying attention. Do it for Him. Even if you can't do it for your boss, even if you can't do it for your coworkers, do it for God and give it your best. That's the whatever principle. So finally, on the question of what to do when you're stuck, number 3, the bullet point there is develop the future. I'm more productive when I give up trying to control the future, but instead cultivate it by making wise choices. This is the principle of preparation, okay? So I'm not going to determine the future. I don't pull all the levers on the future, but I can cultivate, I can plant seeds. I can set some things up that could develop into some pretty nice things in the future. And that's what's so frustrating. So many people are bound and determined to control the future. And that is so frustrating. You can't control your kids. You can't control your spouse. You certainly can't control your grandkids. You can really control virtually zero in your life. Oftentimes we can't even control ourselves, right? But we can cultivate for the future. Joseph does that. He's planting seeds for the future. Hey, butler, when you get back into the palace courts in 3 days, don't forget about me. Remember me. Now, he forgets about him for a couple of years, but the seed that he plants eventually flourishes and blossoms into something truly incredible. I don't know if you've heard the story of the mean barber. The mean barber. But here's how it goes. So there was this barber, his customer sitting there in the chair, and this boy comes walking in the front door, and the barber whispers to his customer, This kid is the dumbest kid in the world. Okay, I'm going to prove it to you. So he says, hey kid, come over here. And so the barber reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a dollar bill. And then he reaches his other pocket. He pulls out 2 quarters. And he says, kid, which one do you want? And the kid looks and the kid thinks and he takes the 2 quarters. And the barber kind of leans over and says, I told you this kid's an idiot. The kid walks out of there. 30, 40 minutes later, the customer walks out of the barber shop. Outside in front of the ice cream store, he sees that kid holding this chocolate ice cream cone, and he says, kid, I got to ask you something. And the kid's licking on that ice cream cone. He says, I got to ask you something. Why did you take the 2 quarters instead of taking the dollar? And the kid takes another lick on that ice cream cone. He says, because the day I take the dollar is the day the game stops. Who's the idiot, you know? That's a kid that's preparing for the future. He's thinking about, I could have $1 today, or I could have this income every week, as this guy does this. Well, Joseph planted seeds, thought about the future, and instead of the futility and frustration of trying to control everything, what we can do is say, I can't control it, I can't determine it. But I can plant, I can cultivate, I can nurture, and really what we're talking about is making wise choices today. Could be some delayed gratification today. Could be opting out of something that looks real attractive today, but you know it's not good for your future. Making wise choices today so that you're preparing for tomorrow. So what about you? Is there an area in your life where you come here this morning and you're just stuck? You don't want to be where you're at, but that's where you are. Nothing seems to be happening. No progress seems to be happening. So I guess the question that Joseph's story begs is this question. What are you doing to make the most of that situation? Are you present in that situation, or have you kind of checked out? What are you doing to pour yourself into your current situation? My prayer, again, returning to the beginning this morning, my prayer is that our eyes will be opened, that we will see God in our families, in our workplaces, in our communities, that we will see God, and that we will hear God's invitation to join in with what He is up to, because I believe And as disciples, we believe that God has positioned us in this place and in this time and in this current situation, pleasant or unpleasant. He has placed us in this position for His glory, for His purposes. So let's not waste the moment, but find ways to bring praise to our Master. This morning, if you're a believer, you can walk in confidence, knowing that wherever you find yourself, that Jesus Christ has defeated your greatest enemies, that the cross is your hope. You can have confidence that God is unfurling a plan in your life. He has positioned you. You may not understand everything going on right now, but He's positioned you in a place for His glory. And if you are not a believer this morning, this is an opportunity to say yes to Jesus, to say yes to His plan for your life, and to step with confidence into tomorrow, believing and hoping that God is at work in your circumstances and that God has big plans for your future. Whatever you need to do, whether it's accepting Jesus, being baptized into Christ this morning, praying with your neighbors or your friend or your spouse there this morning, however you need to respond to God, do that as we stand, as we worship together.